Good evening.
Recording in progress.
Good evening and welcome to the first meeting of the City of Laurel Redistricting and Ward Boundary Advisory Committee. This meeting is being held via Zoom. The notice and agenda for this meeting have been posted on the city's webpage. Ms. Quillen, if you would please call the roll.
Mr. Wilson?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Mr. Clary?
Here.
Ms. Whitley? Chairwoman Bettman?
Here.
You have a quorum, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. And before we get started, I would like to recognize the mayor has joined us this evening. And Mayor, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to come on and thank the committee members for accepting this important responsibility that's required under our charter. Every 10 years after the census, we're required to look at our ward boundaries. And this is what we're doing tonight with your first meeting. So it's an important role. I think there's, to make sure that the boundaries are equal or as close to as can be. And I think that hopefully the staff and others have done some work ahead of time for you all to review. And I look forward to as well having at least one public hearing for the members of the residents who want to speak to the members here. So thank you again. I appreciate all y'all's hard work, and we look forward to your report. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I would like to thank the mayor and the council for approving all of us as members of this, as you say, this important committee. I'd like to welcome the public that may be watching on Laurel TV this evening and our city officials who may be joining us tonight on television. And I encourage your continued interest in this committee and invite you to participate in our public hearing, which our first public hearing will be at our next meeting, and we'll be talking about that in a little while. Moving on to agenda item 2, committee introductions. Thank you, Brooke. I am Mitzi Bettman, appointed chairwoman of this committee, and I am also the chair of the Planning Commission and a member of that committee, and have been for several years. I'm a lifelong resident of the city of Laurel, and I am very much looking forward to working with the group and hearing from the public and officials as we move forward. Ms. Whitley, have you joined us? Okay, moving on. Mr. Wilson, Rick?
Hi, my name's Rick Wilson. I'm a new person here in Laurel. I've only been here for about 42 years in May. I think the one thing I bring to this, I've been on a number of committees here in the city, but I was on the city council in 2001 when we adjusted the ward boundaries at that time. So I remember going through that process with Mr. Zaccanelli and Mayor Mo and a number of other folks. So happy to be part of this again and enjoying working with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. And I should have mentioned as I go through, as part of the requirements, one member from the Planning Commission will be on the committee. That is me. One member from the Board of Elections, and that is Rhonda Whitley Esquire, who is also our vice chair. One citizen from Ward 1, and that is Rick Wilson. And our Ward 2 committee representative is Roy M. Smith II. Mr. Smith.
Yes, good evening. My name is Roy Smith, as mentioned. I've lived in Laurel now for 14 years, and I've lived within the Wellington community, and I've definitely been pretty active within the community, as well as volunteered within some committees within the city of Laurel. So very, very happy to be a part of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. A voting member from the general public, Oris Clary, welcome.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Oris Clary, as noted. I've been here in Laurel for about 14 years, transplanted from New Jersey years ago. And I've been active and worked with Roy for a little while too, but we've in Wellington here. I've also been active in the Laurel Little League for quite some time at this point, and look forward to generally finding out more information about the process and I guess how the city operates overall. Thank you.
Thank you. Staff advisory members, non-voting to the committee, we have Robert Love, our Director of the Department of Economic and Community Development. Robert, do you want to say a little bit about what your background is in the city and what you will be doing for us on the committee?
Sure, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm Robert Love. I've been with the City of Laurel now for almost 5 years. Coming up here in May, I'll be the director for, it'll be for a year. But what we're here to do is answer any questions that the committee might have. Same with the public, relay information. We have background information of past committees, and then also just any general help that you need in regards to this committee. That's exactly what we're here for. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kim Rao, the clerk to the council. Ms. Rao had another meeting this evening. She has a lot of history and background and has provided some information for Robert to present in just a minute. Is also an advisory member of this committee. And I would be remiss if I didn't introduce Brooke Quillen, who will keep us organized and provide us with the assistance that we need. Brooke, would you like to say anything?
Sure. I also, along with being the senior administrative assistant, I am also the historic district coordinator, the secretary to the Planning Commission and the Board of Appeals. I've been with the city for approximately 6 years. And I live in Laurel, but I'm not actually in the city. I'm in Howard County, but I'm very familiar with the city and its history. Thanks.
Thank you, Brooke, and we appreciate all that you do. Moving on to agenda item 3, just a quick review of the resolution, just the purpose and the duties for us. The first 2 are ones that we're starting on this evening: to review the existing ward boundaries and to review the population data from the 2020 census, which is what has brought us together as a group, to review those numbers and see if we were recommending a change. The third part of our purpose and duty is to receive written or oral testimony from any person or government agency represented, including any elected or appointed official. And I think this is an important part of what we will do. And so as we talk through tonight, we'll talk about what we hope to hear from the public and the city officials coming into our next meeting. We have been given a time of no more than 3 months, and this is based on when the resolution was signed in mid-February. I think that with staff help and with us communicating together, I think that we will have no problem meeting that. And our role is to make recommendations to the mayor and city council on the boundaries if necessary. So when we talk about the options, it's important to note that in the resolution, it's not a requirement for us to recommend a change. We will not expend any funds without prior approval from the city administrator. And we are limited in an advisory committee. So one other thing that I didn't put, it's not in the purpose and duties, but for anyone that may be watching us, one of the things, anyone that drives around Laurel and in the south area of Laurel and all knows that we have still have a lot of development going on within the city of Laurel. This committee will make recommendations based on the 2020 census data. We will not be making recommendations based on what we believe the population will be when those buildings are done. So I thought that was important to note. Brooke, if we can move to the next one. So in looking at the resolution, there are really 4 possible outcomes, not maps, 4 outcomes. One, as I just mentioned, we may look at the numbers, hear from the public, hear from elected officials, and one of the possible outcomes is that there's no need to change the existing ward boundaries. Number 2, and these are kind of in order of probably easiest to communicate and simplest, but no preference at this point. Number 2 is, based on the imbalance, we can simply increase the boundary of the existing Ward 1 in order to more closely balance the populations, thereby reducing the number in Ward 2. Number 3 is we can recommend changes to boundaries of both wards. And if we were recommending that, we would look to see what reason we would do that. Would it be to even up lines along streets or things like that? And number 4 is to change the number of wards. Now that would obviously involve quite a bit, but again, that's one of our options that is before us as we go through. So we'll come back to this slide towards the end and have a discussion about it. So if we can move ahead to agenda item 4, the history and background of the wards in the city. Robert, turn this back to you, please.
Yes. So, Madam Chairman, like you mentioned earlier, thank you very much to Kim Rao, who put this together as kind of a resident historian on this. So just reading off what's on here, the current 2 election wards were created before the 1980 general election. For that time, actually, the city was divided into 4 wards, with 1 council member elected from each of the 4 wards and 1 elected at large. There was 1 polling location for the city. In the 1950s, the city was divided into 3 wards, with 1 council member elected from each ward and 2 elected at large. As the city boundaries increased, the number of wards increased until between 1978 and 1980. When the 2 wards were created, Route 198 was the dividing line between the city with equal populations. The city charter requires a polling location in each of those wards. If the number of wards is increased, the cost for implementing an election would be impacted by the number of polling locations. The number of election judges, number of voting machines, and the number of election ballots. Each ward requires a separate ballot.
Thank you, Robert. Roy, Oris, or Rick, are there any questions or comments about the history? Roy? Okay. Rick?
Yeah, I just like to couple things out, and I'm sure everybody knows. I just want to make sure we get it said. There was a time back, I don't know, 5, 6, 8, when the Ward 1 and Ward 2 council members were elected at large. In other words, everybody voted in the city for all 5 council members. So you had to live in the ward that you were running for, but people in Ward 2, as an example, could vote for a councilman in Ward 1 and vice versa, and then of course vote for the at-large. So it's important to understand that the old term at-large meant that you didn't have to live in, you could live in either ward. So I think that's important to get on the table. Since then, we've gone to the version where people that live in Ward vote for Ward 1, 2, and then the entire city votes for the at-large member. So just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Rick. Oris?
Yeah, you said at one point it looks like we had 4 wards in Laurel, and not going down a long history lesson, but why did it consolidate down to 2 wards at this point, or was there?
Rick or Robert, do you want to handle that?
Rick might have a little more background on that. I can check.
I don't really, that was before my time in Laurel. I would imagine it just had to do with the complexity of it. As many of you know, it's difficult and it's time consuming to get people to run for council members. So if you have 4 wards where somebody, that particular person has to live in that specific ward and then be willing to be a council member, for those folks that have ever been on the council, it's a lot of work. And it might have been just the sheer difficulty of finding, 4 people in 4 separate geographic locations to be willing to run. But like I said, that was before my time. As we've gone to the version we have currently, I think it's a little bit easier to find individuals that would like to run for council member, that live in one ward or the other. So that's just my thoughts on it. It does bring a lot of complexity having more wards.
But Oris, to your point, I have written that down, and Brooke, if you would record that, and we will actually ask for an answer to that. Kim will be able to find that in her records to see because it would have come in the form of a recommendation that would have been accepted, going from the 4 down to the 2.
Mitzi,
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
that dates way back in the early years of government. The city used to be a commission form of government where they had 5 commissioners, I think it was. And then they were reinstituted back in 1870 as a mayor and city council. And since most of that time, it's been wards. Now, there were 3 wards, I think, at one time, and 4, but since my time around, and even before that, it's always been the 2 wards and the at-large. So it's quite a ways back when this was 3 or 4 wards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if we can move on to agenda item 5. We were sent this information, the population data, and if anyone is watching us on Laurel TV, this information is also on the city website attached to this meeting. Robert's just going to highlight some of the next 4, the information from the next 4 slides. Robert?
Yeah, I think what I really, point out, the big one obviously is what was our population in this last census. It does come down to 30,060. They do various audits and so forth, but that was their final number at this point. I don't know if that's going to change or not. I think that's important. It's important to kind of take a look at the basically the percentages of how it breaks down within the city right now. If you see just how many people under 18 that we have, and then to that point, how many people over the age of 65 we have currently. Brooke, if you could keep moving. So I think another one that we also are looking at, and some of these are kind of the old, it comes from data that they collect a little bit as far as averages and so forth. Keep in mind, though, what the median incomes are around the city and so forth. If you find that certain median incomes are actually it's a lot different than what you'll find, I would say, on the HUD, what HUD puts for us, because the HUD actually includes us in with Washington D.C. and Northern Virginia. So it's a little skewed at times when you kind of see what those numbers are going to be. As you can see, I like just kind of how it breaks down. It says it's just basic things: education, it'll be race, health, just all the housing that we have in here, and then kind of what the living arrangements are too. How many people own a house? How many people are renting? These are all just good data that they collect every single time, and they kind of make estimates through the years when they but in between the censuses. Brooke, can you keep going? And then it shows how the workforce is split up. I always think this is a really important data point that we have on here. Some of it's a little old, like it's not always as kept up, and I anticipate that with the 2020, they're going to filter out a lot more information. The first thing they're always looking for is the population, but past that, they're going to start filtering out exactly, the in-depth things that if you notice when you fill out the census, obviously it's pages and pages and pages of information. So what you can anticipate is that in time, they're going to start taking that information they got, and then they're going to start incorporating within this. And this can all be found. We have this. I took a snapshot from the census website. If you just look up Laurel City quick facts, it'll show every single one of these, this bit of information on there. It's really handy to kind of get kind of a good snapshot of where we're at, and then kind of where we're going. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. There are 3 points in the data that I found that were interesting and could, in some way, not influence, but helps shape what I'm thinking in terms of the redistricting and the numbers. Number one is 23% of the citizens were under 18. So that would mean if we had an election on the day the census results came out, that would that our number, instead of the 30,060, would be 22,000. So it takes off about 7,000 people that are under the age of 18. Another thing I thought was interesting is that 81% of people had lived in their house over a year. So Laurel, I think a lot of people think of Laurel as being very transient because it's between the Baltimore and Washington, and when Fort Meade had a bigger kind of influence and all of that, but 81%. So we do have a stable and I think long-term population. And then the last thing I think for us as we are thinking of maps and as we start looking at maps is Laurel is, I think, Robert, it was the last slide, is basically 4.3, is that what it was, square miles. And we pretty much are a square / rectangle. So we're not like a lot of other cities around us where the geographic distances are, very, dispersed and all of that. We are very nice and neatly compact. And I think that's a benefit in the city of Laurel. And I think it can help us as we go through what we're doing. So let me pause and I'll go in reverse order. Oris, do you have any comments or questions on this census data or anything that you're thinking, wait a minute, I'd like to see more of something else?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Smith.
So what you're actually showing on the slide right now regarding the land area as far as square miles, the 4.30, is that for, I see it has notation 2010. Has that changed for 2020? Do we have that information?
Robert?
I believe there have been some other annexations in since this time. So I believe our last one, we're probably at about, I think maybe 4, and we might be 4.6 or 4.7 at that point. I'll get you the exact number. Where there have been a number of annexations from, I know, Prince George's County since 2010 on that. So it is a little bit. We always tell people we always say we're just under 5 square miles.
Thank you. Great question.
And one other,
keep going. I'm sorry, Mr. Roy, go ahead.
Another question. So the 4 point, almost a little under 5 miles, it'll be good to know where the annexation occurred.
Sure. Yeah, and I most annexation did take place in Ward 2. If you look along Conti, along Van Dusen, if you're thinking of around the the west side area, that sort of area, that's where much of the annexation was taking place.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I think that'll be good information to know. So thank you.
Thank you. Rick?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Okay. So if we can move on to the current, excuse me, tongue twister, current ward boundaries. Robert?
Yeah, if you kind of take a look at where we're at right now, I think everybody's kind of very familiar with where the breaks are right now. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the south side of the city, and then also to the east. But right now, let me get you your. If we can go, actually, would you mind going to the next one so we can get those exact numbers? So right now, Ward 1 is at 13,614 residents, and then Ward 2 is at 16,446. So how we came about this this breakdown is I worked with our GIS coordinator, Miles Rosner. So the census gives you what's called their census blocks when you're figuring these out. That's how you kind of come up with those numbers. You can break it down pretty well. The unfortunate thing with the census is they don't recognize our wards, so it's just kind of a whole. They don't have it broken apart that time. So I'm hoping when this is complete and figure out exactly what we do, we'll be able to give them and be able to give the lines, because some of the blocks are a little broken up by the ward, so we had to do some more detailing along those lines. But for the most part, we feel we've captured every single block and every single area to come to the 30,060 people, which according to the census we have within the city. So it's like I'm glad we had this, because obviously you can see just how broken down you can get each individual little section of the city. So big thanks to Miles. He was able to break it down to the minuscule little bit. So hopefully we believe we have this very accurate on here. And like I said, I think the good thing is when this is complete, we'll be able to give it to the census. So the next time they do their census block, it'll be exactly at the ward boundaries, and it'll be much easier to find out all the information.
Thank you. So just a couple notes on this. In terms of the statistics, with this breakdown, Ward 1 is 45.3% of the total population, and Ward 2 is 54.7%. So the difference between the two is a 9.4%, or a difference in population of 2,832 is what it is at the current time. That's looking at this, and as we look going forward to say, again, one of our options is this too far out of whack, or is this okay? It's not a question we're answering right now. It's a question that we want to put out there. We want the public looking at. The committee's going to more thoroughly discuss it, and we would like to hear from elected officials. So that's where we are on this. Are there any questions to this current ward population, and is there anyone that needs it printed for them in a larger format that you could either pick up at City Hall, or we could get to you to better know the actual streets? I had 34 years in the post office, and many of them in Laurel, so I can pretty much name the streets, but I know that's not the case for everyone. Mr. Smith.
Yes, I find it a little, I've run most of Laurel physically. And I find some of between the Ward 1 and Ward 2 and trying to determine the streets and looking at, so maybe I have to blow up the version that you've provided, what was provided, to see if you actually, when you blow it up, you can actually see the streets. I'm not sure, or maybe the slide before probably gives you an indication of the street. So I think I may be okay. But the question I do have is, in the 2020 census, what was the determination after the committee got together and provided recommendations to the council? What was the Ward 1 versus Ward 2 breakdown for 2010?
2010, I believe, I'll have to check though. The breakdown was much wider. I believe there was about a 4,000 person difference, close to that. between them. I'll have to get the 2010 numbers. I could probably do that before we're off of this, just to challenge. But I do recall it being quite a wider margin than it is currently.
Okay, yeah, I think
It's
that's
an
important, you know.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And for some reason, I thought I saw that somewhere, but I also can't put my hand on it. So the question is, what was the difference? We know the different change in population from the two, but what was the change in the breakdown of the wards, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me
Rick, any questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Oris?
Yeah. The first question is, do we have access to that recommendation that was done in 2010?
Oh, we certainly could get access to that, I believe.
Okay. Second question, and I know you had mentioned earlier, why do we not use any type of projections as far as population growth, and if we are annexing in Ward 2? Why wouldn't we use any type of projected growth? Because I mean, as I was walking the dog today, I saw looked like a huge building through the trees.
Now that is an excellent question, because again, as a member of the Planning Commission, I think the projection for going out to the next 10 years is another 5 to 10,000. But again, Robert, is there something specific legal that you can point to, or can we get that information as to why that is the case?
I believe because you have to take the population that was there in 2020 that actually applied to it. You couldn't look at potentials on there, because I believe it's because, you know, you might have some of these developments. Well, if a development goes under, what if, you know, it doesn't happen? Well, you know, it's those sort of ideas behind it.
No, understood. But the question is, where is that kind of authority coming from to say that? Is it in Laurel's charter that we are only to look at current numbers, or is it something even bigger in a legal process?
Well,
I think that's what Oris is asking, right?
Yeah, I believe that
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I believe it's part of the charter, but I'll double check.
Okay.
And by the way, I do have the numbers. Kim was nice enough to actually, and I can also share with the members from 2010. And the
Okay.
breakdown, I have the actual charter resolution sitting right here. So Ward 1 in 2010 was 10,654. And then Ward 2 was 14,461. So I think I said about 4,000, so probably a little under 4,000 different.
Okay.
And those would have been based off of 2000 census, if I'm guessing right?
No, that's the 2010. That was the one from 2010.
Okay.
And I can, Mr. Clare, I can actually send that. I can send that charter resolution along to everybody also.
Robert,
Okay.
this is Rick. I just want to follow up with a question. Those numbers you read, was that after any changes or before the change?
It looks
In
like
2010.
in 2010, I believe that was after,
Yeah.
because I'm seeing a population of 25,115, and I believe that was the population at the time.
2010.
At 2010,
So
and
that could have been before any tweaks, though.
This was a resolution to amend the charter to revise the ward boundaries of the city in order to provide for a substantial equal population in each of the city's 2 wards. So
Those numbers you read for 2010 were probably prior to any changes, and then they made a recommendation to either change the boundaries or not. I honestly cannot remember what happened in 10.
This was actually from September 2012, so I would have thought it would have been completed.
Well, it's the same as us, right?
Same
We're
as
here
us.
in 22.
Okay. I'll tell you
Yeah,
what,
so-
why don't we wait and get the information? So the 2 questions that I have are in terms of that we would like to see the resolution
Mhm.
and the, if there were changes made in 2010, what were the first numbers and the approved recommendation, or if the recommendation was changed in any way. Great questions. Okay, let's move on. And again, the committee knows this. I had sent a message out, but if we have anyone watching this on television, the next set of slides, and they're clearly marked samples. The committee is just seeing these really for the first time also. It's to kind of help us start to think in terms of what opportunities there are in our options. Again, option one was to make no change once we look at the difference in numbers and things like that. Option two is to change the, whoops, no, not, sorry, Brooke, back one. I was talking about the options. Is to make a change to the existing Ward 1 to decrease that number, that differential of the 2,000 or so, almost 3,000 difference. And so this is just a sample that says we took the current ward map, and if you look to your left, and you can see where it says Sandy, that's Route 198. There's almost like a blue triangle to the south of Sandy Spring and the west of Van Dusen that runs to Cherry Lane. It looks almost like an arrow. If we took existing Ward 1 and just added that block, so from a communications standpoint, the voters of Laurel would be told where you voted the last time, you will vote next time, and an intense communication effort in this area to say your polling place has changed and your ward has changed. If just that single change there, the difference would swing it to where Ward 1 would have a little bit of a larger number, 15,647 and 14,413. Sample 2 is also taking the existing Ward 1 and it's moving. So if you're looking kind of towards the center, and it's moving more into the old Fairlawn and Laurel Hills. Again, that's what seems to me, without having read the resolution, and we'll be getting it, that appears to me what happened in 2010 is they started coming across Route 198 because that used to be the boundary. And so you have people that are living in same developments that are in different wards. But this map kind of keeps coming into that, and you can see, can balance numbers. So those are two sample ways of saying, let's not change Ward 1, let's just add to it. Okay, sample 3. This is saying, what if one of the reasons, and we're going to talk a little bit before we end this evening about what is the purpose of a ward and how can that influence how we make our decision. One of the things we've always heard is it's about communicating. So this is just, again, a sample that says, let's square up the roads and go take the current existing Ward 1 and come down Van Dusen Road across Cherry Lane. Well, you see what that does. It throws all the numbers out of whack. Ward 1 goes up to 19,000. But from a communication standpoint, boy, that would be a very easy one. Sample 4 says, okay, let's do major roads, Van Dusen to Cherry Lane to 197. And this one would be a change to both wards. It would be taking out the property east of Route 197, which is the Patuxent Greens, the Greenview developments, and all of that. And as you can see, it's still as heavy numbers in Ward 1. Now, to Oris's point, if you could use the projections from Ward 2, this one may look a little little, more possible as an opportunity. And the next one, this is just saying, if you were considering changing both wards and wanted to try and make a communication thing, maybe you go splitting Laurel from north to south along the major roads. So to the west, you go from the river down Van Dusen, across Cherry Lane, and everything south of that, south and west, would be Ward 2, and to the right, Ward 1. Again, Ward 1, the numbers are more. So if you wanted to use something like that, go to sample 6, but even up the numbers, then you start cutting kind of holes into places again. So again, the purpose in these isn't to say, pick one, which one do we like? It's to say, we really do have a lot of things that we can look at in front of us. And so what I'd like to say is that as we go forward into the next 2 weeks, that we take a look at the options and the sample maps that give us some options, and try to start as a committee member making some opinions and preferences for when we come back. Can we go to the next slide? So let me move my cursor out of the way. So one of the things, Rick, are you home or are you still in your car?
I'm just pulling up.
Oh, well, you've got a great signal. One of the things, and I'd like to ask Rick, that I think Rick can kind of put it in a way saying, one of the things to kind of focus on as a committee is, what do we think the role of a ward is? And Rick, you've got some background. What are your thoughts about how that can help us to come to a consensus or decision as we move forward?
Sure, thanks. I think about it pretty simply. I mean, when I think about the wards, the idea is to have, a geographic shape that's easy to explain to people, and it's relatively equal in size. I mean, the best you can. But as far as I'm concerned, then we shouldn't bust up the neighborhood. So, if you look at how those Robert and the GIS folks have those, chunks of developments there, I think if you're, take an example of Arbery. If you live in Arbery, if at all possible, we should avoid, driving a line down through Arbery so that people in one townhouse are voting in one ward and the people in the townhouse across the street are voting in the other ward. So that communication, making that simple as possible, I think is important. And then the other thing is really just to make sure that we have, that people in, if we're going to stay with, let's just assume for a minute you're going to stay with 2 wards, that the 2 council members that are going to run in Ward 1 or the 2 that are going to run in Ward 2, that, they have, that we have an opportunity to be able to have people that live in that ward that are willing to be council members. So I think that's really all you can ask of a ward boundary. It's not like we're talking about, gerrymandering or anything. The city's way too small for that. What we're talking about is that we have equal representation. So as an example, you don't have all 5 council members coming from the same block, the same development. We wouldn't want that. So we want to have an opportunity to spread that out so that people have equal representation. Beyond that, in a town the size of Laurel, I don't think it matters. As long as we could communicate it and that you can get council members from spread across the city, I think we're doing good. That's just me.
Thank you. Roy, how about you? Given any thought to what you think the role of a ward is and what you want to be looking for as we're looking at this data and maps going forward?
That's a really good question, and a question I've thought about and just in general for a while, just living in the DMV area and seeing how other cities operate. I do agree with just the thought process in and trying to divide the ward up to provide opportunities for individuals who would want to run for, different seats within the city. And I do agree, we don't want to divide a neighborhood, even though that happens anyway in other things, far as schools and everything else. You definitely have divisions even within Wellington. One side goes to one school, another side goes to a different school. So there has to be a line somewhere. So, but I think the role of a ward is just to kind of equally divide and give resources and representation equally to individuals within, our tax base within our city, that they all have equal representation, not one has more than the other. Is try to be as equal as possible. So I think that that's the role of the ward. So.
Thank you. Very well said. Oris?
Yeah, that was one of the questions that I had, and I held that because I knew this was coming up. What the purpose is, and did it have anything to do, or what? It's just equal in population, or we start talking about, like I say, your tax base. And there's a lot of information on that census that you can start to look at. But I mean, to me, I would say if we have equal representation to the citizens of Laurel, I think that would be a key focus, and without making it, too much of a challenge with respect to, like I said, dividing up the neighborhood to say, that your neighbors are voting in two different places. So, and I also think we need to, I don't know if you keep into effect or the school boundaries as two. And I think that's totally different, since that's PG County as a whole. I believe that makes up those boundaries. But I mean, I think the main focus would be the equal representation for the citizens of Laurel.
Thank you. And all very well said. And I think, and I completely agree with all three in terms of the equal representation, something that's dividing it to have representation kind of in that, while we are small, we've got kind of those over, we've got the old town, the older section, but even Ward 1 now has Patuxent Greens and Greenview, some of our newer parts and things like that. So I think going forward, I think that's what we would like to hear also from council members. We have Rick's perspective as a former council member. Some that I have talked to when I've asked the question, you run for a specific ward. Do you feel that you are the council person for that part of the city? And almost to a person that I have spoken to, and I have not talked to all of the current council, I'm looking forward to hearing from them. But to a person, they've all said, no, they were elected by those where they live and closest to them, but that as the part of the council, a 5-member council, they represent all of the city, and they don't feel that the interests or the budgets or the way things are spent. So I look forward to hearing from our current council people to see if that's a continued feeling, that, and if that is the case, that they feel that they are representing the entire city, not just representing the interests of those that could vote for them. And I think that helps us in our decisions as we look to the boundaries and the maps and things like that. So we have quite a list of questions that we have asked, that between Brooke, Robert, and I, and getting together with Kim, we'll get those answers and that information to each of us going forward for the next meeting. Is there anything else? Well, let me put it this way. If there is anything else that after we get off of the call that you believe you need prior to the next meeting over, let's say, the next 3 or 4 days, we don't, maybe kind of make your list, send that back to Brooke with a reply all to her last message, so that we can all see it, so that we're not all asking Robert and Brooke to go get a whole bunch of different things. And Robert, I would ask you and Brooke not to kind of react for, several days. Let us see if there are other things that we're looking for. And then we can get that information back. Okay. So to that, and let's move to we're on the same slide, but looking at agenda, identifying action items for the next meeting. And this is me just kind of brainstorming what my original thought had been. And I'd like your input to see if you think there's anything that different that you would like to see. My thought is that the information that we shared tonight, again, whether other people are seeing it or reacting to it, we got our background, we've got some numbers, we've got some samples and some information to take away and think about. My thought coming into the next meeting is that we would have a public hearing, and that what we're asking to hear from the public and our elected officials is, what do they feel about because they have access to this current information. That what we're asking for the public's input is, what do they feel about the current boundaries and the numbers? Are they too far off? Do they think there needs to be minor change or major change? And kind of that's, instead of trying to put a map out for the public and saying, here, do you like what we did? And having them either say yes or no. Let's hear where they would like to see us, think that they want to see us go. Does that make sense?
I
Works
think,
for me.
Roy?
Yep.
yes, I think that's acceptable. Yes.
Okay. Oris, do you agree?
Yeah, I
Okay.
would agree.
So what we'll do for the next meeting, and we'll look at the information that we get back, and then maybe we can, synthesize that information down for a couple slides so that we can present that to the public. We will already have that next time to say, here's what happened in 2010. Here's where we are 10 years later. Here are the options before us. We would like to hear your input. And then from there, I would ask also everyone that over the next week and a half, that you look at the samples and see what if you can start to form opinions from those samples, again, that make you lean towards no change, just tweaking Ward 1, breaking up, or potentially going full-blown to different. And after the public hearing, maybe we can start to have some of that discussion. And then we get to a third meeting and we may be ready to come to consensus on a recommendation. Okay. Before we close,
Good.
we are looking at, Brooke, where did the 8 p.m. time come for March 15th?
Not for me.
Ooh. I think we were looking at, we'll get a correction out to that. I think we were looking at Tuesday, March 15th at 6 p.m. To include for public hearing. And does that work for those of you on the call?
Yes. It works for me.
Okay, yeah, we'll get that corrected because, like I say, I'm hoping that with it publicized that we will either receive written testimony or have some of the elected officials call in to give us their input. Okay,
That will be in a Zoom format as well, correct?
that is correct. I believe, Brooke and Robert, I believe it's April before the city is considering going back to in-person. Is that correct?
The second council meeting, I believe March 28th will be the first public meeting. So until that happens, then yeah, everything will be Zoom.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before I close, just a real quick, Roy, anything?
No, this has been very good, and I will have a few questions that I'll send along for consideration for the next meeting, but no, I don't have any more.
Thank you. Oris?
Yeah, no questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Rick? Robert, anything?
You said not to look up things, but I actually was looking, looking them up already.
I'm
I
sure.
believe I have the, what, Mr. Wilson had asked about that was the resolution after they had already had all the meetings. They did attempt to, and I'm gonna confirm the map they had. It appears that they did attempt to even it up more at the time with that resolution and did that, but I'm gonna do a little research on that and get all the information out to the committee members so they can take a look.
Thank you. Brooke, anything before we close?
Nope, I'm good.
All right, and thank you to Laurel TV for always carrying our meetings, and look forward to talking to everyone soon. This meeting is adjourned.